Hello magical hands and welcome to another tutorial. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jessica, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for coming back. In this tutorial we are going to be recreating this outfit that I saw on Thrifted by Sally's page on Instagram, and if it's something you also want to learn, make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and let's get into the video proper. So I have already gone ahead to draft the basic bodice of a dress. I have from the shoulder to the bust point, I have the shoulder to the under bust line, I have the shoulder to the half length, which is the waistline, and then I have the shoulder to the hip line, and then to the full length, which I am using 45 inches. So if you're a beginner, you don't know how to draft your basic bodice points, there is a detailed video on that. All you have to do is to check the pinned comment in the comment section. Now the next thing we are going to mark is the armhole. So the length of that armhole I have there is 8 inches, and I'll mark the midpoint, which is 4 inches. Right on that midpoint, I'll go inwards by half an inch as seen, and I'll connect with my curve ruler in just one swipe to get my armhole curve. So I had already marked the neck width of this blouse before, but I'll just go ahead and mark it again. So for the width of the neckline, I used 3.5 inches. And then for the depth of the neckline, I was very careful with how deep this would be, because personally I am quite busty and I don't want to have my boobs showing out, so I use 7 inches. So you can mark this according to how much cleavage you want to put out there, but personally I use 7 inches, and you guys saw the result. So connect from that 3.5 inches to meet the 7 inches, and this is the front piece, guys. I'm going to use this pattern paper to cut both the back and the front piece of this dress. Now this dress is not going to need a dart, so we'll proceed to marking our round bodice measurements. On the bust point line, you're going to mark your round bust measurements, divide it by 4 and mark what you have. I have 9.5 inches there, and then we're going to skip to the half length, the waistline. You're going to leave your under bust and go to the waistline. On the waistline, I marked my round waist measurement, divided it by 4, which gave me 8 inches. And then we move to the hip line. My round hip measurements divided by 4 gives me 10.75, so I'm going to mark it right on that spot, and I'm just going to bring my hip measurement to the full length. I know this fabric is stretchy, and you probably might be wondering, is this one supposed to be like a pencil dress? But don't worry, we are going to shape everything on the main fabric itself. So we are just going to connect all those lines together. And now we can cut everything out. Also, this pattern paper, I will use it to cut the front piece and also the back piece. So my lycra fabric is already folded into 4. The reason why I folded it into 4 is because it is very transparent, and one of them is going to be serving as the lining for the main piece, so that it is no longer transparent. So I folded into 4, and I already placed it as seen. This is the front, and I have to place it on the folded side of the fabric because the front has to be cut on fold. While you are cutting this, make sure not to add any sewing allowance at all. Make sure to transfer your exact measurement to the fabric itself, and that is because this fabric is very stretchy. Now we've cut out the front piece. You guys, it took me 5 minutes to arrange this fabric on the floor before cutting this. Make sure you take your time to arrange it very well. It's very important that it is equally folded well. So now we're going to move over to the back piece. Now you're going to mark the neckline of the back piece, and the neckline of the back piece has to be deeper than the neckline of the front piece, and it's also still going to be a V neckline. So I just marked my bust point as my depth for the neckline, which is 11 inches. Next thing we are going to do is to slash and spread in order to create this gathers effect. And you see, from that bust point, that is where my slashing will start from. Let's say you use your under bust line as the depth of your neckline, right? That under bust line is where your slash and spread will start from, okay? Wherever your neckline ends, that's where your slash and spread will start from. If you look at the inspiration picture, you will see that this ruch effect went to the full length of the dress. So it means you have to slash and spread this up to the full length of the dress. But I knew my fabric was limited because I was also using my fabric as the lining. So I had to slash and spread and stop at the hip line. And you guys saw the results it gave me. But if you want that result, make sure to slash and spread to the full length. And I think that was the only change between mine and the inspiration picture. So now we are going to place it on the remaining piece of fabric we have. Remember, this fabric was earlier folded into 4. So remember that now when we cut this out, we are going to have 4 separate pieces. 2 pieces for the back and 2 pieces for the lining, as you already know. So we are going to go ahead and cut this out again, making sure that there is no allowance. Because of how my fabric was limited, this is the amount of slash and spread I could get. Obviously, if I pull it any further, this pattern paper will move outside the fabric, and this is all I have. So we'll just go ahead and start cutting. So at the point where the slash and spread started from, you are going to notch inwards, and at the point where it ended, you are going to notch inwards as well. It's very important to notch at those 2 points. It's just to help us remember something as we go further. Just make sure you notch at those 2 points. So this is what your dress looks like without that bend. This is what it looks like. You see that this other side has excess fabric and the other side is already straight. Let's go into sewing this now. We'll keep this aside. So for the front pieces, I place them right face facing the right face, and I'm going to sew the neckline and the base of this. We all know I have a manual sewing machine and I don't want my stitch to jump, so I'm going to use a paper to aid the stitch work properly. And while you're sewing this, I would advise that you pull the fabric, okay, because we need this to be sewn at the stretch. Because if you don't pull your fabric while sewing, when you want to wear it up, you will hear some sound of thread cutting, and that's like your fabric losing. So always pull your fabric, okay, just try as much as possible to put the fabric underneath it. And also make sure to set your machine to a regular stitch. Don't tighten up the stitch. That's at that control side. Just make sure it's sewing on a regular stitch. So now we can pull out the paper, and you'll see that the paper is very easy to pull, because that point where the needle was passing through, it was actually tearing the papers inwards. So it's just like the paper is already halfway done, waiting for you to just pull it off. So it is very, very easy for you to pull out the paper. So around the neckline where I have the V part, I'm going to notch so that by the time I flip it over, it is very relaxed at that point. Okay, you can also go ahead and notch around like as I'm doing. It is very optional, but before you flip it over, make sure to notch. And just a close view of what it looks like if you sew it the way I asked you guys to sew it. You can see that it is very, very neat. You could barely tell that it was sewn with a manual machine. So now we are going to keep the front piece aside and work on the back pieces as well. So this is what the back piece looks like. Remember the shape. Now I'm going to take my time and arrange these 4 pieces right face facing the right face. If you don't know, lycra has a good face and a bad face. The good face is much more shiny, and the bad face of it is quite lighter. It's not as dark as the good face. So make sure to take note of the good face and arrange them right face facing the right face. After arranging them, they should look like this. But if you are very confused as to why my back pieces look like this, I'm just going to make you guys understand. So by the time we pull this together, you will see that it's now looking like a normal dress. Okay, we have the V neckline there and all of that. So the first thing we are going to do now is to take this to our sewing machine, and we are going to sew the neckline, okay, from the shoulder to the neckline. We are going to sew it, and we are going to sew the base as well, same way we did to the front piece. And after sewing, we'll take our time to remove the paper that we use to enable us sew this properly. Make sure to pull your fabric while you're sewing. Make sure to put the fabric under the paper while you're sewing. So next, we are going to flip this over to the right faces. And then we are going to place them on each other, just as seen. And we are going to sew all through that whole line downwards from where the neck depth of the neckline ends, like it's where you turn the neckline and stopped. From that point down to the full length, we are going to sew these 4 pieces together. So in order to create that ruched effect, we are going to need an elastic band, the one of 1/2 inch wide, but the one I have here is 1 inch wide, but don't worry. So first thing we are going to do is to mark from that top part to the hip line where we notched earlier, and what I have around that point is 21 inches, and that 21 inches you are going to divide it by 2. So dividing it by 2 gives us 10.5 inches, and that 10.5 inches is what we are going to, is how long the elastic band will be. So if you slash and spread to the full length, make sure to mark your full length and divide it by 2. That is going to be the length of the elastic. So I went ahead to divide my elastic band into 2. Like we already said, it's bigger than what I need it for. And in case you are wondering, yes, elastic bands actually do fray. So we are going to need our lighter to seal up the parts that we already cut so that it does not fray at all. Also, I am using this big elastic out of laziness, guys. I just didn't want to go out and buy the small one. I didn't even know I did not have it to, restock. So it is advisable you use the smaller one, because I realized that the smaller one has more elastic effect, like it pulls more than the big one. The big one does not have that much effect as a small one, but it still works for me. Now you're going to place the elastic from that top part to the point where we notched on the hip line, and you're going to sew it. You're going to sew it on the allowance, and when you are sewing, you don't need to add a paper, because this can actually sew. A manual machine can actually sew on elastic, so there's no need for you to use a paper at this point. Now, if you slash and spread to the full length, make sure to sew your elastic on that allowance down to the full length, so you can get the exact results we have in the picture. We already know the reason why we didn't do that. So I already flipped this over, and this is what it looks like. It's looking really beautiful. I wish I had enough fabric. I actually thought the 4 yards would be enough. If not that I used the fabric as my lining, it would have been enough. So now you're going to place the front piece on the back piece, right face facing each other, and we're going to sew the side seams and the shoulder as indicated. So the reason why we joined it together is because we want this fabric to stay in one place, then we can properly shape it. Like I said, this lycra moves a lot. So right on that hip line, if you want to know your hip line, where the elastic stops, that's where your hip line is. We are going to cut inwards, and I'm just going to mark at the base 2 inches inwards. This to make sure that this dress is a very pencil and fitted dress. So I'm just going to start cutting into that 2 inches we have at the base. That is how pencil I want this dress to be, and I'll just make sure to repeat that same process on the other side. So by using the allowance, that is what I cut out, I'll place it on the other side and I will cut it. That way I have accuracy. I am sure of what I am cutting. So because of this whole effects we did at the back, the waist will not be as fitted as you want it to be. So you would want to go ahead and reduce inwards from the waistline, so that at least the waist is snatched as well. Like I said, this fabric is very stretchy, and I'm using my free hand to cut this because I actually know what 1 inch looks like. My target is 1 inch on the waist side, and then just make sure to blend it into the hip properly. Make sure it's not looking sharp, and that's why I did that. But you can go ahead and use your tape and your chalk to be sure that you're marking the right thing. So now we can take this to our sewing machine and sew the side seams together properly. After sewing it, this is what it looks like. So guys, I'm going to pull this so you guys can see how stretchy this is. And like I said, while you were sewing this earlier, you were supposed to pull it while you were sewing, because if you don't pull it, you see this stretch I did, you'll be hearing sounds of thread cutting, and that's like all the seams you did, that's everything cutting out. So make sure to pull while you're sewing, it's very important. Our dress is ready. It looks so beautiful. It looks like an already made dress. Next thing we'll do is to cut out the sleeve. For the sleeve, I have some pieces of fabrics here. I just went ahead and joined them. I made sure that the joining part was like at the midpoint of the sleeve. Yes, just like this. That is the part I made sure that had the joining, so it looks like a design, more like. So now I have both my sleeves. I'll go ahead and join them together. Now I'll join them to the sleeve just as seen. I'll just take this and sew it all around. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. Guys, if you watched to this point and you've not subscribed, please make sure to hit the subscribe button, and see you in my next tutorial. Bye.